It's been an exciting offseason in Chicago with Connor Bedard being selected by the Blackhawks with the first overall pick. Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks is here to talk about the first impression that Bedard made and the offseason outlook for the Blackhawks next on the Locked On NHL Podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And you can now also find us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. One of the biggest stories from around the league this offseason, the drafting of Connor Bedard, the generational talent. The Chicago Blackhawks took him with the first overall pick. Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks joins us to talk about Bedard and a very exciting offseason in Chicago. And Jack, the developmental camp was held, but there was a little twist. Talk to me a little bit about the impression Bedard made and what was a little different about this year's development camp.
Yeah, so the Blackhawks actually elected to go with off-ice activities only for development camp this year, which I don't know if there's another team in the NHL that I've seen go that same route. And as a fan, it was a little bit unfortunate because going down to Fifth Third Arena, the Blackhawks practice facility in the past few summers, and getting a firsthand look at some of these prospects and some of the players that they just selected in, past NHL drafts, and getting an opportunity to see their skill sets on display was one of my favorite parts of the offseason. So for them to move it to off ice only was a little bit disappointing, but at the same time, I do understand why they made that change, given kind of the time when development camp is held, right? It's right in the midst of the summer. Most of these guys had their seasons come to an end earlier on in the spring and won't be gearing up for training camp until, August or September. So they more so just wanted them to stick with their off-season regimens and to kind of work on the physical side of things, some weightlifting. And they actually brought in former Stanley Cup champion Johnny Oduya to talk to them about some breathing exercises and taking care of your body and all that stuff. So it was more so just kind of like a week to kind of guide these players into becoming professionals, right? So it was a little bit different, but I still think it was very productive. As far as Connor Bedard goes, though, obviously we didn't get to see his skills on the ice, but I think all of his comments and everything he says just remains just a very normal 17-year-old kid is kind of just what I keep taking away, right? He just happens to be, as you referenced, a generational talent and maybe one of the best prospects that the game of hockey has ever seen. But he's just such a humble and nice kid. I mean, he's always smiling, always seems to be enjoying himself. You could tell he feels a little bit uncomfortable with all the fame that's coming his way with being first overall. But the one thing that really stuck out to me, and this has kind of just been reminded to me more and more since the Hawks have drafted him, one of the first things Kyle Davidson, Blackhawks general manager, said when they drafted Bedard was, obviously we're getting a special hockey player, but Connor Bedard is also a very special person. That's really hit home with me, hearing how he's handled himself and all the comments he's made. A very humble kid. And I also liked to hear him say, we've had some reporters ask him how he wants to be a leader for this Blackhawks rebuild. And he said he just kind of wants to do it by being himself. And, I think everything that Connor Bedard has said, right, he's going to have the weight of the world on his shoulders here with all the expectations in Chicago. But I truthfully think he is the kid to handle these types of expectations. And he's just a really special kid. And it's awesome to see how humble and how much fun he's been having so far since being selected first overall.
I know it's early. I know there's a lot of things to be determined, but where do you see him fitting into this lineup, and any particular players who you think would be ideal line mates for Bedard?
Yeah, I expect Connor Bedard to get a top 6 role right out of the gate for the Blackhawks. First line or second line, I think, is where he's going to be. And we've heard Kyle Davidson say as well, not only Bedard, but another top forward prospect for the Blackhawks, Lucas Reichel. They're both going to be getting opportunities to prove themselves at the center position next year. So I would probably say Bedard and Reichel, you could flip-flop them either way, but they'll probably be the number 1 and the number 2 center for the Blackhawks entering next season. As far as players we could see Connor Bedard play with, I think Taylor Hall is an immediate fit, and that was the reason why the Blackhawks wanted to go out and add someone that could be offensive-minded and help Bedard develop in his first season. I think Taylor Hall plays that fast-paced game, and he's also trying to prove himself as well that he could still be a top-line player in this league. So I think Taylor Hall's a really good fit, and I think Andreas Athanasiou, who the Blackhawks brought back on a 2-year deal, obviously plays with a ton of pace as well, and that's the direction the Blackhawks have been trying to move in, just getting faster and faster. So I think a top line of Taylor Hall, Connor Bedard, and Andreas Athanasiou would be a pretty good fit for the Blackhawks to open up the year.
All right, we'll see how that pans out over the course of training camp and the preseason. 5 first-round picks in the last 2 drafts. Talk to me about the process of rebuilding this team and how many of those 5 picks do you think will see the NHL this year?
Yeah, out of those 5, the only one for sure is going to be Connor Bedard. That's a lock. I mean, I don't see him going back to the WHL with Regina. I know he's being humble, and he's said in interviews, there's no gimmies out here. I still got to go and make the team. He's going to be making the team. The other one to keep an eye on, though, is Kevin Korchinski, 7th overall pick in the 2022 NHL Draft. The Blackhawks got that pick from trading Alex DeBrincat. He's in a very interesting spot where he just put up some very dominant numbers for the Seattle Thunderbirds in the WHL, an absolute juggernaut of a team this past season. And he could be ready to make the leap to the NHL level, but there are still some things that he needs to develop on the defensive side of things. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Blackhawks handle that, because supposedly they're interested in burning the first year of his entry-level contract in order to get to that second deal a little bit sooner. But I don't know if he's quite ready defensively to handle the NHL level. So he's going to be a very interesting one to keep an eye on. But the Blackhawks are in a really good spot considering all the first-round picks, second-round picks that they've taken these last few years, and they got more to come in the next 2 drafts ahead. So getting Connor Bedard, checking off that generational talent box as well, and just adding to the prospect pool, man. It's going to be fun to watch all these kids develop these next few years, and has the Blackhawks sitting real pretty moving forward in this rebuild.
What does this team still want or need to accomplish for the rest of this offseason, or do you think they're pretty much set?
They're pretty much set at this point in time. I think that maybe they're going to be adding a right-handed defenseman at some point in time, probably a guy on a 2-way contract that can go up and down to the NHL and AHL, but they really don't have many more moves to make. They kind of rounded things out by adding Nick Foligno, adding Corey Perry, adding Ryan Donato. So they've made all their major moves here for the offseason. They've got, I think, basically their NHL roster at this point in time. So I wouldn't expect the Blackhawks to do all that much before training camp opens up in the fall.
All right, give me one hot take, a prediction for Connor Bedard for this season that is not the typical everyday prediction.
Put me on the spot here, Gil. I love it. I think he's going to be a 35 goal scorer right out of the gate. I have said on my show, I'd be happy if he put up 60 to 65 points. That's what, my head is telling me. That would be a strong first season for Connor Bedard, but my heart is telling me he's going to come in and he's going to be, I don't know if necessarily the Blackhawks are going to have the best offense around him, and I don't know if he's going to be racking up points, but I think as far as the goal scoring goes, he's got a lethal shot, and I think he's going to step right into the NHL, and that's going to translate immediately. So I think Connor Bedard is going to be a 35 goal scorer for the Blackhawks next year. I think he's going to lead the team in goals.
All right. Well, Jack, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and how they could find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fun time to be a fan of the Chicago Blackhawks, something that hasn't been said very often these last few seasons. So if you want to hear more about Connor Bedard and the Blackhawks, you can check out the show Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast. You can also check me out on YouTube for free as well. And if you're interested to find me out on Twitter, check out my personal @JackBushman too, which is also right down below.
All right, Jack, thanks so much for doing this. Always a pleasure talking hockey with you.
Absolutely, Gil. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting on Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you could spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who's going to hit the first home run. And no matter what baseball team you root for, you'll find plenty of interesting betting opportunities and great odds at FanDuel. It's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball.